Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan have suspended the training of new Afghan recruits after a series of attacks by Afghan soldiers with ties to insurgents. And the new United Nations envoy to Syria renewed calls on Saturday for the government to stop its bloody crackdown on protesters there as the death toll from Syria's civil war surpassed 20,000. Right now, joining me today, we have Van Jones, former special advisor for green jobs in the Obama White House and co-founder of Rebuild the Dream, Rose Aguilar, host of Your Call on KALW Radio in San Francisco and an op-ed contributor to Al Jazeera English, Neera Tanden, president of the Center for American Progress, and my colleague John Nichols, Washington correspondent for The Nation magazine, associate editor of the Wisconsin Capital Times. Great to have you guys all here. Thanks. All right, the Democratic National Convention begins on Tuesday, so we're looking at the state of the modern Democratic Party, the voters, delegates, funders, and interest groups that comprise the Democratic coalition. For much of the last 80 years, one of the largest of those constituencies was organized labor. Organized labor has been an essential component of the Democratic coalition, providing the money and organizing power necessary to compete with the well-funded GOP. But the influence of organized labor within the Democratic establishment has eroded considerably in recent years. The latest example of that erosion is the very location of the Democratic convention next week, Charlotte, North Carolina. For the first time in a generation, the Democratic convention is being held in a state that forbids private unions from requiring workers to pay union dues, effectively making it impossible to unionize. North Carolina is also one of only 2 states in the country, along with Virginia, that makes it illegal for the state to collectively bargain with public sector workers. Not surprisingly, North Carolina has the lowest rate of unionization of any state in the country. The choice of Charlotte prompted an outcry from many labor leaders who see it as just the latest in a long litany of affronts. Some are even skipping the convention altogether. North Carolina, of course, provides a model for what conservatives are trying to achieve in their sustained nationwide assault on collective bargaining rights, a nation without unions. In fact, one of the proponents of that vision, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who proudly calls herself a, quote, union buster, was awarded a prime speaking spot at the Republican National Convention last week, which she used to attack labor unions.
We deserve a president who won't sacrifice American jobs and American workers to pacify the bullying union bosses he counts as his political allies.
You're not going to hear rhetoric like that from the podium in Charlotte this week, but that doesn't mean that national Democratic politicians have done a whole heck of a lot lately to aid the cause of labor. The outcry was really quite vociferous when the convention was announced. Labor has actually taken steps. They have not been contributing to the fundraising for the convention itself. They're sending fewer people. And Rich Trumka, who's the head of the AFL-CIO, had kind of declared political independence earlier in the year, although they then endorsed Barack Obama fairly early on.
Shaky.
And so, yeah, this is the eternal conundrum. Labor has nowhere else to go.
Right.
Because that Nikki Haley is the voice of the party on labor issues in the Republican Party. The Democrats know that. The amount of raw union members is declining. And so I guess, where does this go from here?
Well, they're also having the convention at the Bank of America Stadium, and I understand that the Democrats are not going to call it the Bank of America Stadium. It doesn't look good. Frankly, this sends a very strong message to unions and workers. I think that they chose Charlotte, first of all, and that they're having the convention at the B of A Center.
Should they have not gone to Charlotte?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, I think they're sending a strong message, and just like you said, they know that the unions really don't have anywhere else to go. It's a slap in the face, really, to workers who are struggling. And, a new study recently came out about the new jobs that have been created. We're talking the majority of these jobs are low-wage jobs, between $7.50 an hour and $13.50 an hour. You cannot live on that. And that is
where sure as hell not unionized.
No, of course not. I mean, what's happening right now is that, and I've interviewed a lot of people, they are being fired at $50,000 a year jobs. And because people are so desperate for work, they're rehiring people at half the salary with no benefits. Yeah. I mean, I met a guy.
Yeah, there's nothing that aids the boss. I mean, this is the broader problem, right? The broader problem with 8% unemployment is that there's nothing that aids the bosses more. There's nothing that handicaps labor negotiation just for an individual worker. Forget about collective bargaining more than 8% unemployment, because where are you going to go?
And that's the problem, is there's no collective bargaining. So rather than the unions spend money on these conventions, $100 million, they should spend money on organizing, because collective action is the only solution here.
Ben.
Well, I mean, I think this is part of a broader problem. We have, we're now suddenly us not fighting to defend our friends when now our enemies are coming for us turns out to be a bad strategy. It's not just the labor unions that are smaller, weaker. Remember this group called Acorn, which the Democrats ran screaming from, and it turned out the little video was a total made-up farce. They took out probably 50% of the GOTV operation for African Americans with one silly video and no defense mounted. So you have a party that should be growing by leaps and bounds. The middle class is being destroyed. The American dream is being gunned down. It's not being gunned down by Barack Obama. It's not being gunned down by labor unions. It's being gunned down by big corporate, global corporations that don't want to pay America back. They don't want to pay America back with taxes. They don't want to pay America back with good wages. They don't want to pay America back by respecting our air and water. They want to take from America, give nothing back. Corporate America would be the worst boyfriend ever, right? I mean, they just take. They don't want to give anything back. That's destroying the American dream. Right. But rather than Democrats saying the champions of middle-class people are going to be the people we rally around and we're going to go to the mat for, we tend to in the face of controversy, back away. Then our friends are weaker, our enemies are stronger, and it's a cycle.
Let me give just a small little, to me, if you were to say, what is the relationship between the Obama administration and organized labor? And how has the Obama administration dealt with organized labor? This would be to me Article 1. This is a tweet sent by the president the night before the Wisconsin recall election. Now, of course, the Wisconsin recall election was the key strategic political priority of organized labor. And there was tremendous mobilization around Scott Walker's attempt to essentially gut the ability of public sector unions to effectively collectively bargain in that state. And the president didn't go to Wisconsin, but the night before the election, 12 hours before the election, this tweet: "It's election day in Wisconsin tomorrow, and I'm standing by Tom Barrett. He'd make an outstanding governor." 100 labor, your biggest priority gets less than 140 characters.
I'm not going to put on my shoes and go march. I'm going to tweet.
This is really the challenge that we're in, and it was odd because in Ohio, in November of 2011, labor had one of its greatest victories in modern times. Governor had put on an anti-labor law, a really tough one. Unions mobilized, and they won. Now, the fascinating thing was, if you want to know the story of what happened in Ohio, it is that labor led, not the Democratic Party. Labor led, and the Democratic Party so beaten up in Ohio that it really didn't. It had been so wiped out in 2010 that they followed labor, and they won big. In Wisconsin, unfortunately, a big part of what happened was the Democratic Party led. And I think they tried hard. I don't fault, but they could not bring the top to bottom infrastructure in that the Republicans can on almost any fight. And just to close the thought here, when you extrapolate this out, understand what has shifted here. We're at a very critical juncture. This convention is a critical juncture. One last week, because as recently as 20 years ago, the Republican Party put labor people on stage at conventions.
That's true.
It was a front page story in the New York Times in 1964 when 3 members of the AFL Executive Board said, "We're going to back Johnson. We're Republicans, Republican Union member, but we think Goldwater's so bad." We've moved so far beyond that now.
Nir, I think you want to defend the administration, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. I saw when I was.
It's not fair.
Well, go ahead.
I might just have a good point.
Defend. Go ahead.
Look, I think we could talk about Charlotte. We could talk about Wisconsin and politics. One could argue labor could have done more itself in Wisconsin and just saw the polls and chose not to put all their resources there. They're definitely putting more in the presidential campaign. I think the issue really should be about what the president is doing, right, around labor. And, in the American Jobs Act, the president has defended and asked for actually increased resources for public sector workers, teachers, firefighters, police officers. He's actually argued for, he's made the case very clearly that it's public sector workers that are actually, and the firing of public sector workers, much by these Republican governors, that's actually holding this economy back. And so in terms of what we're actually talking about, it's important that we hire more people. We need more unionization. If you look at Germany, one of the reasons why their economy is doing better is because they have strong unionization. It drives up wages and it creates demand. And that's why we need more unions in our country. But it's also, we should recognize what the president is doing, and he's actually arguing for billions of dollars to put teachers back in the classroom.
So there's two issues here, and I just want to lay these out because there's two things. I want to get to this question of political independence because that to me seems fascinating and profound in terms of the long-term structural issues. In terms of the ledger of the president's record, just so folks kind of have a sense of where this ends up, and you guys can jump in if I'm overlooking or undercounting things. I think on the bill of complaints, there is the fact that the Employee Free Choice Act, which was the number one priority of organized labor, was essentially left to wither on the vine. The White House putatively supported it, but never really put much muscle into passing it. I think that's generally the consensus. The pay freeze on federal workers has been a huge complaint, particularly by the AFG, which is a union that represents a lot of those workers. That pay freeze is going to enter a second year, I believe. Yeah. Coming up next, the president's support for some large-scale firings of unionized teachers in Rhode Island and some other rhetoric around teachers' unions. These seem to me some of the big complaints. On the side of support for the president or things he's done in terms of labor, aside from the American Jobs Act and the parts of the Recovery Act that sent money to states to close those budget deficits, which meant people didn't lose their jobs, there are some very good appointments in the National Labor Relations Board, including one recess appointment the AFL-CIO fought very hard for. There's some beefed up staffing at the Department of Labor under Hilda Solis and some enforcement on wage theft and hiring a very zealous enforcer from New York State that has been cheered by labor folks. So there's a mixed record in a lot of ways.
Let's not also forget how important it is to labor that we've passed the Affordable Care Act and health care because that issue becomes, which is, not a minor piece of business in labor negotiations, how much we're spending.
There are also some problems with the Health Care Act.
Yeah, I don't want to litigate ACA, but hold on one second. Hold on one second. All right. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the record, and I also want to talk about political independence and a fight that's going on in Charlotte. We're going to hear from an organizer down there right after we take this break. All right, we're talking about the relationship with the Democratic Party and labor, and particularly organized labor, and talking about the president's record on it. I should state that a contested, fraught relationship between a Democratic president and organized labor is not something that
never
just
heard
happened.
that before.
And in fact,
ask Jimmy Carter.
I mean, it goes to go back to the New Deal. I mean, John Lewis, who was one of the most towering figures in some senses, built what we have today in many respects. The modern labor. I'm pretty sure he endorsed Roosevelt's opponent in 1940.
In 1940, he endorsed Wilkie in a national radio broadcast.
Yes, I mean, at a time when John Lewis would do a primetime radio broadcast, all of the radio networks would cover it because he was a huge figure in American life. Rose.
Well, I just wanted to come back to the wages and bringing this down to the ground where it really matters to people. Harold Meyerson had a great piece in the Washington Post back in April, and he looked at the standard wages at auto manufacturing plants in the Midwest and found that the wages have gone down from $28 an hour to $15 an hour. New hires are capped at $19 an hour, regardless. Okay, and then one more thing, because this is important. A new high-tech plant in Muncie, Indiana, Caterpillar is hiring people at $12 an hour, $24,000 a year.
A travesty. But my question is, what do you want the president to do about it? I mean, that is what has happened in terms of that is that unionized labor has moved to the non-unionized South, which have states like North Carolina and that have an Alabama where Toyota is manufacturing a lot of cars that have right-to-work laws, right?
But that's not all that's happening. What's really creating downward pressure is the fact that we are dealing with outsourcing. That's the real challenge. Yeah. The reason why manufacturing jobs' incomes are coming down is because there's global arbitrage about labor costs, and basically people are now competing for lower cost manufacturing. And the challenge with the lack of unionization is that there is not enough power to bring those wages up.
And this is a big problem for Barack Obama because Barack Obama did not break with the Democratic-Republican consensus on free trade. And I will tell you that in the upper Midwest, if you talk to folks who are hurting, there is an awful sense, and I hear it from people who will do down-ballot hard work. They're going to work to re-elect Sherrod Brown. You get them on Barack Obama, and Sherrod Brown, Senator from Ohio, you get them on Barack Obama, and they struggle with it. They will probably vote for him, but there is a real struggle because Sherrod Brown in Ohio, running for re-election, has battled free trade day and night, saying and teaching the people of Ohio, teaching them that a free trade, let me just finish this thought, teaching them that if free trade goes forward, they're going to lose their jobs. And then they got a president standing up announcing that he's doing a new free trade pact.
Behind closed door deals is what's happening. Public Citizen says this is horrific. They cannot get the information. So you've got corporate executives behind closed doors making these deals.
Yeah.
How is it any different from what George W. Bush did on free trade?
The trade consensus goes back essentially.
Yeah, it's not
NAFTA.
Here's the reason why you have the heartbreak.
Yeah.
This is a heartbreak for union folks. They use their power to help this president. They use their power to help the Democratic Party. And it was time for the Democratic Party to use its power to help them, which was EFCA, which was giving them the power to go out and organize. The Democrats were missing in action. And when you break that trust, you got to remember, labor stepped up in a way you'd never seen before. They put all their chips to say, we're going to put in place some people who are going to help us. We're going to help you with the little we got. You help us. When that didn't happen, you leave labor now without a strategy going forward. And then comes the attack. That's the problem. That's the problem. Card check was going to give
I should be clear here. You're talking about the Democratic Party here. I mean, before the main obstacles to the Employee Free Choice Act, more than anything, were Senate votes, right? I mean, I'm taking
away from just Obama.
The White House, talking about Democrats in the Senate.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the challenge with EFTA. Look, I appreciate that we should have passed EFCA. Okay. I agree. I totally agree with that. But, I mean, I think we should step back here and really have an honest conversation about what's happening with manufacturing jobs and jobs overall. I agree that we should have a tougher negotiation with trade agreements, but the challenge on trade really is we are facing downward pressure on wages from countries we don't have trade agreements with. Biggest downward pressure is coming from China. We don't have a giant free trade agreement with China. So I believe
most favored nation trading status with China.
We should have a tougher stance with these countries. But regardless of whether we have that, these companies are making decisions. And that's why we do need stronger unions. And it would have been important to pass EFCA. But we should recognize as well that
I agree with the big macro question.
Wouldn't pass it. And the president, the president made a decision about health care. He made a decision to pass health care over EFCA. He didn't think he would get EFCA, I believe. He didn't think he would get EFCA, and he thought he could get health care. So he made that decision. It's not like he decided not to do EFCA and decided not to do anything else.
Right.
He actually decided to make what I think is transformational change for all workers by passing the Affordable Care Act. But it's not like he just decided to do nothing.
And we shouldn't lose sight of the Affordable Care Act in this conversation. What you said before, I think, is important insofar as to the extent that labor plays a unique role in American politics as a, quote, interest group, it's the fact that its interests are larger than the narrow interests of its membership. And it worked very hard, I will say this about the labor movement, it worked very hard to pass the Affordable Care Act, despite the fact that actually, from a very narrow self-interest perspective, right, the people who have health care in America are organized, unionized workers. So they had the least amount at play. I mean, the 15 million people who are going to get Medicaid and the Medicaid expansion, those aren't labor members.
No,
by and large.
Absolutely, but it does help labor the fact that they don't have to negotiate on health care in the same way that they had
labor has been in what we've seen, I think, in the last few years, a lot of defensive actions by labor, right? Rearguard actions.
That's because the Republican Party has a boot on the neck of labor.
But I want to talk to someone who's in North Carolina who is trying to actually organize public sector unions, not just defend the rights of existing public sector unions, but organize new public sector unions in the hardest state to do that in. Saladin Mohammed is going to join us up next.
Awesome. Great.
Our role is not to build the power of a political party or a candidate. It doesn't matter if candidates and parties are controlling the wrecking ball or simply standing aside to let it happen. The outcome is the same either way. If leaders aren't blocking the wrecking ball and advancing working families' interest, then working people will not support them. This is where our focus will be now, in 2012, and beyond.
It's Rich Trump declaring kind of political independence. Declaring political independence. I want to bring in Saladin Mohammed, an organizer of the local United Electrical Workers Union, which is seeking President Obama's support in its fight with the city of Charlotte. Saladin, can you tell us a little bit about the history of anti-unionism in North Carolina is profound and fascinating, and in some senses is kind of dark vision of what the future of the entire country might look like. What are the conditions under which you are working to try to build the labor movement in terms of North Carolina's legal structure?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to state that North Carolina epitomizes a regional problem. In all 12 southern states together combined, there are more union members in the state of New York than all 12 southern states combined. So, it's important to really recognize the role that the South has played overall in weakening labor throughout the country. The South has become a global region, in North Carolina in 1947 when the Taft-Hartley Act was passed, and also in 59 when right to work was established. There were no blacks in the legislature. Black people couldn't even vote. So when we think about the emergence of right to work, particularly throughout the South, it comes out of a particular history, that had a system of Jim Crow, which had already shaped the relationship between workers and the employers. In North Carolina, we call right to work a Jim Crow law, the last Jim Crow law here. In Charlotte, it's so important to point to Charlotte because Charlotte was the leader in leading to the enactment of the denial of collective bargaining for all all public sector employees, state, county, and local government. In 58, the chairperson of the Chamber of Commerce of Charlotte introduced the report and proposed the bill. Their representative proposed the bill calling for the prohibition of collective bargaining rights, not only the prohibition, but to make it illegal for all public sector workers to join the union.
And my understanding is that there was even a misdemeanor law on the books in North Carolina that it was illegal to be a member of a union, which is obviously plainly and patently unconstitutional because you have the freedom of association in this country. And that was struck down by the Supreme Court, but kept on the books in North Carolina.
Yes.
Now, I want to ask this question.
Absolutely. In fact,
go ahead.
In fact, the North Carolina Public Service Workers Union had to challenge that, and they had to get a print change because supervisors would use that statute and the bold headlines of that it's illegal to join the union and it's a misdemeanor to scare the workers from joining and organizing a union.
This is just so people are clear on this. This law that was struck down as unconstitutional stayed on the books, and people that were trying to stop organizing efforts were using the law, even though it had the footnote obviously saying this law is invalidated, but it's still in the books. It is illegal. It is a misdemeanor.
Make a big poster of it.
It might possibly still be a problem.
Right. Let's zoom out and look at the stakes of this public sector union fight, because it's so important in terms of where the power right now of unions is, as private sector union has been just destroyed by all the forces you've talked about, sustained assaults on collective bargaining, globalization. And Saladin makes a good point. Before there was China, right, there was South Carolina.
Right.
In many American states, public sector unions, so these are northern states, in many American states,
the first outsourcing
sector unions are the Democratic Party. Not the whole of it, but they are the infrastructure that has kept the Democratic Party strong and functional. Doesn't mean that there isn't a Democratic chairman and Democratic, committee, but the fact of the matter is that public sector unions have stepped up. It is not because they love the Democratic Party per se, and they will sometimes endorse Republican candidates for different offices, but they defend the public. They defend the commons.
Right.
And as such, because the Republican Party has in the last decade begun a militant campaign to assault trade unionism at all levels, they've been pushed more and more into a clear Democratic position and had to spend more and fight more. The interesting thing is that we are now at a remarkable juncture where, we listened to Saladin here talking this incredible story. Understand that this goes back, there's deep history here. And I'm not going to tell the whole deep history, but I'm going to say that the deep history is that trade unionism has changed our parties and it has changed our politics. Now, as there is an effort to fully remove trade unionism from one party, Democrats have to really be conscious. They're going to a place where they can indeed, without going overboard, speak a language of support for collective bargaining and trade unionism that I think could be very, very vital, not just in the North, but in the South. And they better do it.
And I would love to hear Saladin tell us a couple of stories about what workers are actually facing, because I have a piece coming out in Al Jazeera English tomorrow about warehouse workers in Southern California. And I want to give this guy, Ruben Valadez, a voice. He's 61 years old. And what he does is unloads all the crap that people buy at Walmart. And he starts working at midnight when we're all sleeping. He works from midnight to 8 in the morning. He makes $8.50 an hour. He gets no benefits. He does not have access to clean drinking water.
Right.
We're talking about Southern California. It's the largest port in the country. He barely gets a break. Because he's speaking out, he's followed to the bathroom. They cannot even mention the word union. His hours have been cut so much that he is not able to pay his rent. He got evicted. He's now living in a motel. Yeah. This is a 61-year-old.
These are American heroes who are fighting for America's middle class and need a champion in the Democratic Party, and I think can have a champion in the Democratic Party. But we have to understand the stakes. That as a party, we have a key pillar being knocked down by Republicans, being knocked down by global corporations. Let's come to the rescue. I think the Democratic Party can be an ally.
Saladin, I want to hear about the front lines of the fight with sanitation workers down there. We have to take a quick break, and we'll come back and hear that. Saladin Mohammed from the United Electrical Workers in Charlotte, North Carolina. Tell us about what the workers that you're trying to organize are facing. I think one of the arguments that gets made about public sector unions, they just want big pensions and benefits. And because people are used to hearing about it in the context of people that already have union contracts, we forget sometimes what jobs like, say, being a sanitation worker in Charlotte can look like when you don't have representation.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that the attack on public sector workers is an attack on public services. And there's an attempt to hide that. Organized workers are the strongest power to defend public services. This attack on public sector workers is a part of a strategy toward privatizing public services and, again, making them for-profit entities. That's very, very much missing, I think, in the argument, in the debate. It's a part of the social safety net that working class people rely on. Here in North Carolina and also in Tampa, it's ironic, that the whole Republican and Democratic convention, you can secure federal grants and federal funding in the amount of $50 million in Tampa and $50 million in Charlotte. Now, but the workers, can't get a decent raise. Workers are required to work 12 to 15 hours a day. They've enacted now a new policy of minor infractions, accidents, etc., of 30 days suspension without pay. Now, anytime workers are working 12 hours a day, it's quite possible that somebody might have an accident. Yet these workers don't have any official voice. The only voice they have is when they picket the city hall, or when they go and pack the city council meetings, when they call on their allies, to make noise on their behalf. This is why it's so important, because in a society and an economy where a job is required in order to provide basic necessities for the family, then workers' rights is a human right. Because it will just dislodge the whole community if workers have no rights to be able to address the issues that impact them on the job.
I want to reemphasize one point you made that gets lost about public sector unions, because they're in the assault, particularly from Republican governors on public sector unions. It's this idea they're greedy. And when you think about a public sector union worker who is working in, say, a mental hospital, okay? That mental hospital, those patients have no voice. There's no constituency that fights for better services in that mental service hospital, it's a public hospital. The only possible political power constituency that can say, no, don't cut the hours, don't cut the funding for this place, are unionized workers inside it. They play this kind of bulwark role. I'm just restating what Saladin said because it's such an important point. Van.
Unfortunately, I'm still sort of in shock because I just left Tampa. I was down in Tampa at the GOP convention doing a little coverage and commentary down there. And the Republican Party wants the entire country to be North Carolina. All of the horror stories that you just heard, they want that for all 50 states. And I think the challenge that we have right now is we have this frustration that we haven't been there for labor now. If we think it's bad now, if we don't now rally to make sure that we don't have these kind of policies happening across the country, I think we're in real trouble. I grew up hearing, I never heard the term public sector worker when I grew up. I heard teacher, firefighter, nurse, librarians, and those were the heroes we were supposed to look up to.
But I think all of this discussion gets at why unions are important, and I think that's what we should be arguing about is what we're really seeing in this economy right now is with 8% unemployment, but also with the drive down of wages, what's really happening is we're not creating enough demand, and that's hurting all of us. And so why is it important to hire teachers, firefighters? Because when they're fired, they can't buy anything, and that is what the real challenge is, why we're facing lower growth, why we don't have better employment, is because this economy drives on consumption, and we're really losing that. And that's why it doesn't really make sense for corporations who really need that demand to drive down wages in the long run, but that's what's happening.
We should also say that wage stagnation is a trend. There's the micro trend of what's happened in the recession, but wage stagnation is a trend that's happened.
But really accelerated over over the last 10 years, and is a product of the inability of people to really organize.
And productivity is off the charts. Yeah. You had $378,000 per worker in 2007 in productivity. Last year, $420,000.
Yeah. Incredible.
Walmart just posted their second quarter profits, $4 billion. And this guy's making $850 with no clean water. I mean, this is unconscionable in the year 2012.
Mother Jones called this the great speed up because one of the things that's happened in the recession, and partly it's able to happen because of the decline in union density, is that places have fired workers but maintain their level of output by just working people harder. Exactly. I want to thank Saladin Mohammed. Thank you so much for joining us this morning of the North Carolina Public Service Workers Union, and good luck with the convention this week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about the more about the role of labor in the Democratic Party, as well as the role of finance and how a party can manage to represent the interests of both at the same time. Is it possible? When we get back. On Thursday, President Obama will close the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte with a speech at the Bank of America Stadium, a venue whose name has Democrats squirming. Here's the DNC chair, Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, earlier this week.
The whole sort of culmination of the whole week is at Bank of America Stadium. Yet, Democrats, and I know a bunch of literature calling it Panther Stadium. Panther Stadium. Do you have a problem with a mega bank sponsor?
I don't have a problem with a sponsor, and whoever's talking about the Panthers do play there, and they're a
what
great
are you
football
calling
team.
it?
I'm calling it the football stadium.
Villaraigosa's awkwardness about President Obama speaking in a stadium whose naming rights were purchased by a major U.S. bank highlights almost perfectly some of the contradictions of the modern Democratic Party. As the power of labor in the Democratic Party has diminished in both members and finance over the past decades, two things have happened. Inequality has risen and campaigns have become much, 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 much more expensive. In turn, Democrats have looked to the financial sector for funding. In 2008, Barack Obama raised more money from the finance sector than any other campaign in history, $22 million to John McCain's $13 million. That mountain of Wall Street cash serves to heighten the contradictions in the modern Democratic Party. While the Republicans can just ruthlessly protect the interests of capital, the Democratic Party must try to represent the interests of both capital and labor. While attempting to do just that, President Obama said this in 2009.
I did not run for office to be helping out a bunch of fat cat bankers on Wall Street.
That single utterance, uttered by President Obama, that hurt bankers' fees, combined with Dodd-Frank financial reform, pushed the titans of finance back to the Republican Party in a huge way. So far this cycle, the finance sector has donated over $17 million to Mitt Romney and only $6 million to President Obama. This sweeping reversal in just a matter of years ushers in a potentially new era for the Democratic Party, one less dependent on finance and capital and more responsive to labor. I want to bring in Robert Wolf, former president of UBS Investment Bank, an outside advisor and fundraiser for President Obama, a member of President Obama's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. He's also host of the weekly webcast Impact Players on Reuters channel on YouTube TV. Robert, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I am obsessed and amazed with the story that you see. Nick Confessori has written about it. Jane Mayer's written a whole bunch of people about how spurned the titans of finance feel. And I nothing makes me love President Obama more than these stories. I'm honest, honestly.
Yeah.
Nothing, because if Jamie Dimons of the world are mad, he must be doing something right. That's my feeling. And
Is that your feeling?
I left UBS August 1st. So,
It's fine by me now.
So I'm curious to get some insight. I mean, when you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, profits on Wall Street, the banks are incredibly healthy from a profit perspective. People that make a lot of money are making a lot of money. Is it really just that they don't like the word fat cats? Is it Dodd-Frank? Why are people so upset?
well, those are two good things to start on. Let's start with fat cat. I'm glad he used the word fat cat. It helped me go on a diet. I lost 30 pounds. Okay? I mean, let's be blunt here. We have been called a lot of different things from a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. Whether he used that term or another term, it's really meaningless in what we have accomplished over the last 4 years, which now segues right into the Lehman weekend. No disrespect to everyone who talks about the Lehman weekend. I was one of the 12 individuals sitting there for the 3 days of the Lehman weekend. When Governor Romney or Congressman Ryan say, are we different than 4 years ago? I mean, come on. January 2009, we lost 800,000 jobs, the most in 60 years. Okay? Mm-hmm. The stock market's up since the president took office almost 100%. We have 500,000 more manufacturing jobs than we've had. That's the best since the 90s. Our exports as a percent of GDP have been gaining double digits ever since he's been in office. So we have had economic stability. We're not where we want to be. Right. With respect to Dodd-Frank, we need reg reform. Right. Just to be clear, we did not have the tools that weekend, okay, for what we needed. Okay, I'm not saying I agree with all 5,000 pages. Sure. I liked it better when it was an 85-page Treasury blueprint. Right. But reg reform is needed.
Right. But I want to go back to this first part because that, to me, is the key point. I mean, when I survey the scene from my perspective as a humble journalist, not in the room during Lehman Brothers weekend, I look at the banks and I say, these guys save your bacon. They saved your bacon. They saved your livelihood. They saved you from total destruction and discrediting. Remarkably, it's almost like the whole thing never happened. It feels like the whole thing never happened in the rest of the country because the recession has been tough on jobs. But from the perspective of finance, why are you complaining? You should be throwing roses at the feet of. I'm being serious. Why is there not more gratitude? This is the thing that drives me bonkers.
But there's a choice in this election, right? I mean, it's not just between one person and the other. Like, there are people on Wall Street who understand that, and there are people in finance who understand that. You know, you're one of them. There are others. But look, one of the reasons why so many people of incredible means are giving to the super PACs on the Republican side and to Mitt Romney is because it's a return on investment. Yes. They're looking at a 20% across-the-board tax cut, and that, you know, they're looking at their own.
If you're Sheldon Adelson, you're looking at the end of the inheritance tax.
Yeah,
which is a darn fine thing.
But there's other people on Wall Street who are recognizing that it's better for the entire economy to grow, and you know, I think those are people who are supporting the president. You know, I think that's the difference. Like, they're looking at a longer term versus only immediate short-term issue.
I want to find out how much of this is temporary and how much of it you think is long-term and where things go from here in terms of the two parties and the two candidates in this election right after we take a break.
Great, thank you.
All right. Neera Tanden, you just made a point, and I think it's great, right? I'm saying, why aren't the Wall Street bankers lining up with roses at the White House to thank President Obama for saving them? And Neera, you made the excellent point. The election is between two candidates. One candidate is proposing things like getting rid of the inheritance tax entirely, getting rid of a 20% tax cut, lowering capital gains. In fact, Paul Ryan, I think, wants to get rid of capital gains altogether. Right. Mitt Romney would pay 0% taxes, I think, more or less.
I think it's 1. To be fair, I think it's 1%.
Okay, 1%. So you're saying it's a return on investment. I'd like you to respond to that. Is that your understanding of?
Listen, as opposed to talk about why someone's moving that way because of taxes, we should talk about this way. Why do we need taxes to go up for the wealthy? Mm-hmm. It's about having a shared sacrifice. Yeah. And I need to put one fact on the table. Since 1776, every war we've ever had in this country was followed with taxes. Every war. Right. We've been in a 10-year war.
I love this country.
Okay, it is time that we look at the sacrifice differently. This is not like I don't want my taxes go up, but at the end of the day, this is what I would recommend for this country. They all give the president grief about clarity. This is very straightforward. We could pass right now tax relief for the extension for 98% of this country. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, but the reason
then let's have the argument on the last 2% and see which way it goes. But let's bring clarity to 98% of this country.
But I agree, and if you look at the polling, right, that's where the polling is. But the problem that we face is that the 2% there has a lot of money on the table. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars.
But this is the fundamental disconnect of the moment, because we have, absolutely everything we're saying here, everything you're saying is totally right, except that president who will say it and probably say some of that quite well this week still they desperately look. I talk to DNC people all the time, to all these people. They desperately look at that Romney pile of money, and there's people saying, oh my gosh, we got to get some of that.
Listen, what are you talking about? The president could not be more clear about the policy difference of this. The president's like, I will raise taxes for this group as part of shared sacrifice.
But I am saying that the emphasis on that message is undermined by the absolute fear of Romney's money.
It is, but let me say this.
But that's not accurate. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
The top 2%, okay, they are absolutely willing to give back. What they want to see is a fiscal deal. Okay, so they understand where their dollars and cents are going. And I think the president put something on the table, okay, which was for every $3 of spending cuts, it's $1 of revenues. And we should just look at the facts. 15% of our GDP right now is revenues. 24% is spending. The average has always been 18% of revenues, 21% of spending. So when the Republican Party stands up and say 0 to tax increases, it's silly time. It just doesn't work.
Right.
Okay, you need taxes to go up. Okay, less than spending. You need spending to go down, and that's where we need to be. Right. That's the whole battle on GDP.
Let me point one more thing out here. This is Kate. You'll note, astute viewers and listeners. 18% in revenues, 20% in spending. We always run deficits, right? The United States government runs. No. I'm saying this is a good thing. It's good.
We have run surpluses.
No, but if you look at the totality
the overall
of the last 100 years in American history, we run deficits, and we run them for a good reason. More on that after this.
I was just